unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Hudson Hammond, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to the second hour of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, obviously, broadcasting from the City of Angels, or City of Demons. As you know, from the last hour, we've been talking about alien abductions. And I got some more insight, and I got to say, I've been investigating this topic for close to 35 years at this point. Now, one magical city or one magical state is New Mexico. Why? Because a lot of people point to Roswell. Roswell as being what began a lot of people in the current times into believing that extraterrestrials exist. Even to this day, Roswell is one of the most investigated crash and retrievals of its time. But it's not the only thing that's happened in New Mexico. It's not the only crash and retrieval. There's lots of activity all over the world. As you know, there's crash and retrievals all over the world. And even in New Mexico, I believe it was a year later, there was the Aztec crash. But this time we're going to be speaking with someone who lives in Santa Fe, and he doesn't know just about extraterrestrials. He knows about ghosts. And he's a lot more than that. He's a paranormal investigator, an author, an actor, a historian, and he also gives tours in Santa Fe of historical places and places that have been haunted by ghosts. And it happens to be the one and only Mr. Alan Pacheco. Alan, welcome to the show.
Why, thank you, Dr. J. Very happy to be here.
It's a pleasure, actually, to talk to somebody from New Mexico and someone who does these tours. And since we were talking about alien abductions, and I was telling you before the show which direction we were going to go, if we were going to go with the ghost direction or the extraterrestrial direction. And I figured, well, since we were going to start with MUFON and ETs in the last hour, you brought up some amazing stuff of what you know what's been going on in Santa Fe. So let me ask you this. Before we actually dive into the ETs, what is it you do when you take people on tours so we can cover the ghosts real quick?
Okay, well, I do private tours. I take groups, walking tours through Santa Fe, and we stop at different locations, and you get the story of the haunting, also my investigations, and sometimes at certain places I'll show people photographs or Xerox copies that have been taken on my tours or on my investigations at X, Y, Z place. And there's some places that we can go on into, and it's very interesting. It's just not the ghost of Jane X. You're going to get the background, the history of it, and also my investigation of what I've turned on up at these different places. And if you have a ghostometer, even a ghost app on your iPhone, bring it along, because you never can tell. And of course, bring a camera, because sometimes, well, we do run into things.
And a lot of now, pretty much everybody has a camera on their phone. I think the very few people are someone like my mother who barely got a flip phone, let alone something with an iPhone or another smartphone. But regardless, let me ask you this. A lot of people, for instance, when I interviewed people from, say, Ghost Adventures or like Grant Wilson, they really are into ghosts. And other people are really into UFOs. But not as many people combine the two into one big umbrella as paranormal, which I think they're all related. Now, when we were first talking, and I asked about extraterrestrials, and you knew all this different stuff we were going to talk about. Do you see any correlation between ghosts and extraterrestrials?
Yes, I do. There are certain areas in this world where, for some strange, well, for a number of reasons, you do have UFO activity, UFO waves, and also ghost activity. And in these areas where these UFOs are seen, or vice versa, ghosts, you have the opposite. And there is a correlation. And okay, of course, there's other areas where, no, it's just one thing and that's it. But that goes back to, for example, gosh, you can talk about portaleses or portals, stargates, different type of energies, dimensional beings, and also ley lines, which perhaps these UFOs do come through or use through these stargates, and they do power up the ghosts. And one thing about Santa Fe, well, when the Spaniards first got here back in circa 1530, etc., around there, they found out that this was one of these magical places in the world where your prayers, well, there's very little filter. It goes to the angels. It goes to Big G. And then, of course, in the 1960s, the Beverly Hills crowd, the Manhattan crowd, that were into the negative, they got here and they found out that that telephone line goes the other way, too. In other words, Santa Fe, or Santa Fe, freely translated, means holy faith. So when you're talking about this area being one of these energy places where you can have ghosts, you can have UFOs, this is it. It's one of these strange places in the world. In other words, depending on which way you want to go, to the negative or to the positive, this is the place of holy faith, depending on which faith you're going to go to the dark or to the light.
And it has to do with your intentions, I would think. Like you said, if, the 15 or 1600s, if they were praying, for positive, and it would manifest. And then you have people who have, say, negative intentions, and that would manifest essentially. Do you ever heard of the Maharishi effect?
The Maharishi effect, possibly, but maybe clue me on in, and I can say yay or nay.
The Maharishi effect essentially began with a study in Washington, D.C. And what they wanted to do was test the power of meditation / prayer. And what they found was that the more people that are thinking about the same thing at the same time goes up exponentially. So I'm just making up numbers. For example, if one person prays or meditates, you get 1 power. If 2 people do it, then you make it the power of 3. If 10 people, it may be the power of 100. So do you think that has anything to do with what's happening in Santa Fe because of maybe the group of people possibly wanting to have some sort of effect? Like you said, the people who came here originally from Spain, being very much into faith, and maybe that's the reason why it was starting to manifest the positive prayers?
Well, okay. Again, too, yes, you're correct about intention and a group of people. I mean, you can have, there's good people from Beverly Hills, there's good people from Manhattan. I'm just talking about a couple of these people that were Luciferians who came on over here and started doing bad things. And with this, concentrated effort, yes, they're going to be doing invokings of evil. And the same thing with the Spaniards or Anglo-Saxons coming down the Santa Fe Trail, and they're going to be doing invokings for good. Yes, but this place is one of these regions on planet Earth where it amplifies that kind of energy. So you get the very best and the very worst coming on over here. And it just doesn't have to do with, people saying, oh, well, and that's, mumbo jumbo, rah, 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 rah. No, it is, for example, Santa Fe historically is just, well, it's the cradle of cults, they call it. But more importantly, this is where world history changed. Here in Santa Fe is where it's hallowed ground for the KGB. During World War II, the Soviet Union, this is where their spies were able to pick Uncle Sam's pockets and get the secrets to the Manhattan Project, the building of the atomic bomb. So you have all this kind of mojo going on over here. Good, bad. So you name it, it happens here in Santa Fe. So you can say historically, Santa Fe is unique with all these strange things that have happened to it. And I just mentioned one. And then with all of the UFO activity or the most haunted city in the USA, So Santa Fe is, point X for oddities.
Now, you mentioned portal or portals, plural, in Santa Fe. Have you been able to identify any areas that you think people disappear or extraterrestrials or UFOs appear or coming in and going out of, like you said, possibly like ley lines? Or are they just specific areas in Santa Fe, or is it just one area?
Well, the area of Santa Fe, first of all, is as I said before, is unique. And some people say it has to do with the ground. Other people say it has to do with the light. And that's become so many artists come on over here and do different types of artwork here because of the light. Now, as far as portals, portales, stargates, etc., there to the east of Santa Fe, in the Pecos area, there's going to be the slang for this is going to be the Pecos Triangle. And like I've said before in the past on tours, Americans love the idea of a triangle. But it's not a triangle. It's going to be like an oblong area where people do disappear just as mysterious as they do in the Bermuda Triangle. And in this area, gosh, you have UFO activity. People have seen all kinds of craft, shades, outlines of, ghostly figures or shapeshifters, whatever you want to call them, and voices and nobody's there. It's bizarro, this area, and yes, people have disappeared like something out of the Twilight Zone as they just into thin air.
So when was the most recent case of missing people? I mean, does this happen like a regular occurrence? Like every year, would you say, so-and-so disappeared, or this person's daughter disappeared? Because Santa Fe is a very populated city. I mean, and from people outside looking in, I've always heard of it as like you said, the Beverly Hills of New Mexico is what I've been called. But you're basically in a flat area. It's not full of forests and like you would say Idaho or something like that. So I wouldn't imagine that a little child would wander off and get picked up by a black bear or something like that. Do you have regular cases of people literally missing that are not made or caused by humans?
Yeah, au contraire. Geography-wise, Santa Fe, okay, you can call it the high desert, but to the east is going to be the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And depending on who you want to talk to geography-wise, it's going to be like a dorsal coming off of the Rockies or part of the Rockies, etc. And you're going to have ponderosa pinon trees on up there and snowcap up in the Sangres. Now, as far as the missing goes, well, it's not that well. The most recent here happened last year. The body was found, but it was found in an area where it had already been searched, and it's impossible for this person to have been found where he was. But let me give you something, Dr. J, about something that people can sink their teeth into, and if they got any theories, they can always, or inside information, they can always go to my website, SantaFeGhostAndHistoryTours.com, and email me about this case. Now, this case that I'm going to describe has been mentioned in the national media, and of course, I've done tremendous investigation on this, searches, etc., and you'll see photos and information on this about this missing person. And this is the case of Mel Nadel. Now, Mel, this happened, I'm going to say, 2009, 2010, around there.
Almost 10 years ago. 10 years ago.
Well, 8, 9 years ago, etc. And he was nobody's fool. He had a gym here in Santa Fe. He also had a jewelry business. He was a black belt in karate. And happily married, teenage daughter. And it's September, and a couple of his buddies say, hey, let's go on up to Elk Mountain and let's see if we can get some game. So he goes on up there. Now, mind you, and the way I describe this is this area is not the trackless jungle of Angola. It's going to be like northern Georgia. Every mile you're going to have a pasture, you're going to have a bicycle trail, Indian trail, cabins. It's impossible to get lost in this area. And yes, you have the high timbers, but it's not going to be triple layer canopy. And well, they go on up there and they camp off of this road called Elk Mountain, and the camp 20 to 40 yards off of the dirt road, and they've got their state-of-the-art tents, or they're comfortable. And two of the guys say, "Okay, we're going to go out and get something." And Mel says, "No, I'm going to stick around here. I'll build a blind, and if something comes on by, I'll take it on out." So these two guys go on out. They come back at dusk. Mel's vehicle's still there, and there's no Mel. So they crank off some rounds, and there's no response. There's no gunshot. So then they get the air horn, and there's no response on the air horn. So they end up going and getting the ranger and the state police, and they've got to wait X amount of hours. I don't know, what, 12, 14 hours. That's standard procedure with New Mexico law, because maybe the missing ran off with a torch singer or something to that effect. And they start this search. So you have professional searchers, you have volunteers, you have people with tracking dogs, you have people on horseback, Cessnas, Hueys, those are the ancestors of the Black Hawk helicopters, and the place is just scoured and scoured and scoured. Now, they find Mel's tracks, and Mel's tracks go roughly about 100, 110 yards away from the camp, and they just truncate. In other words, Mel does not go back on his footprints. There's no animal, mountain lion, bear print around these tracks. There's no spent casings. There's no sign of a struggle. There's nothing. In other words, and here it is, all these years later, no bone, no clothing has been found of this man, and none of his accounts have been touched. And like his wife said, people just do not vanish into thin air. But that's what happened to Mel, and that's what happened to other people in this area. And that's the reason I tell you that is because this story is because, again, it has the most, there's more of this information, this data out there on the internet. And of course, you can go to my website and see what I've done with the searches, with the investigations, and other searches of people that have gone missing on up in this area.
It sounds to me almost as if he was either put in another dimension. I'm just, pulling from thin air there, or almost like he was plucked from the ground from a UFO into the sky and taken off somewhere.
Yeah, we're talking about UFOs. That's one of the theories, okay? Because there's UFO activity on up there. Did something from parts unknown take Mel? Was Mel lured on out there? Was Mel chased on out there? Or did some type of doorway open on up and something come out and get him? Or did he fall into some type of dimensional doorway? I mean, the mind spins about the possibilities about this. But again, too, Mel was nobody's fool. He was clothed for cold weather, and it's September when this happens. So, it's not... and the point being about this, it's like, the ghost ship of the Mary Celeste, the ghost crew on the Mary Celeste. What happened to the crew there with that ghost ship in the middle of the Atlantic in the 1800s? And this is just one of many people or, strange happenings that go on in this area.
You also mentioned wave or waves. I've heard about a wave of UFOs in, I believe it was in the 80s in New York, and then there was the Belgian wave. Did you say that there is regular waves, or has there been a wave in Santa Fe, New Mexico of UFOs?
Yeah, when there is, what they call a UFO wave, it's not going to be like what happened in the 1950s over Lubbock or the Texas Panhandle, where you're going to see a squadron of UFOs in V formation coming over through the night sky. No, what we talk about UFO wave, that's going to be UFO waves or UFOs are seen over X amount of nights. One UFO, then another night, another UFO. This kind of parameter. Sometimes people will say, okay, there was, maybe 2 or 3 of them, but that's what we got in a certain time limit. Let's say a fortnight, 2 weeks, we have X amount of UFO sightings, and that does happen. And one of the things about this is that, well, when these UFO sightings, these waves used to happen, and I guess the last time this happened, as far as this phenomena goes, this would have been January, February 1970. And if anybody has any information, again, go to the website and email me, SantaFeGhostandHistoryTours.com, and tell me what their data is. But Santa Fe at the time, the county, the city, the hamlets was greatly decreased in population. In other words, Santa Fe got discovered by the New Yorkers, Los Angelinos, and they moved on over here. Back in those days, from 71 on backwards, it was pretty much like a cowboy artist type town. And when these UFO wave would happen, if not all or close to all of the telephone lines here in Santa Fe County would go wonky. And of course, this is way before cell phone, when everything was power line. And if you'd pick up the telephone, all you'd get was this really strange sound, wah, 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 wah. And then after, an hour or so, it would clear on up. Sometimes there was another mechanical sound to that. And the only two times that I've ever heard of this occurring was during the Kecksburg incident of the UFO that went down in Pennsylvania, at Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in 65, and then around, late 67 with the Point Pleasant Mothman Bridge going down there in West Virginia. So that's one of the things about the UFO waves prior to 1970. And if you have any information on that, Dr. J, please let me know, and I'll go on a little bit further about what happens now with modern UFO waves.
Well, actually, I was just going to ask you more about this telephone business. Was this happening with, say, every phone in everybody's house would be ringing at the same time, or was it just when they picked it up to call someone, they would hear that noise in the background?
Yeah.
What was the explanation given by the telephone company? I mean, if that many people were affected.
The machines are busy. Telephone's out of order.
The normal.
Normal, misdirection of what's going on. And it would be when people would pick up the phone and they couldn't get that line. You'd just have everything be on out. And have you ever heard of that kind of happening, that kind of phenomena yourself?
Actually, I have. I've heard of that. I've also heard of, even in the modern era, of people getting phone calls, that have either like an electronic British voice on the other end that's not created from a computer. There are several cases, and it usually happens. I don't want to say it only happens to these people. The only time I've read about it is from certain abductees. It's almost as if they're hybrid children are trying to get a hold of them. There's several explanations, but this is not an isolated incident that I've heard of in Santa Fe. That's something that's global. And of course, there are many times explanations that, are take care of the reason for it. They're not mysterious, but there are cases that people clearly cannot figure out why. Another thing I wanted to shift your focus on is the actual extraterrestrials, because you mentioned one key word that is not something we've talked much about this show: shapeshifters. First, can you describe to people what a shapeshifter is?
Okay, that's going to be some type of form of being that's going to be able to morph into other types of, human form, beast form. In other words, it's going to be like a chameleon, be it go from, for example, from a Sasquatch to maybe nothing, or to maybe human-like figure. In other words, it's going to be able to, kind of be like that creature in that novella, Who Goes There, or Halt Who Goes There by Campbell, and John Carpenter turned that movie into The Thing. In other words, it's going to be able to adapt and come and be a different type of shade or creature, and that's what we call the shapeshifter. Now, the Indians, they talk about that they're skinwalkers, and brujeria, Spanish version of witchcraft, that some of these things, witches can manifest themselves into different types of animals. But that also even goes into some theories about UFO activity, that some of these, whatever they are, from be it dimensional or physical planets, or they're able to mask themselves as something that they are not. And then one of the things about this is the Sasquatch or Bigfoot, that, well, how come we've never ever been able to capture one or shoot one and bring it on back? Well, if it's not of this world, and if it's a dimension, if it's a shapeshifter, then you're not going to be able to do that. And depending upon what type of ethnicity you are, sometimes a reptilian, reptoid, is going to bring more fright to a person, and another type of person, because of their background, that's going to bring the gorilla, bear-like creature is going to strike more fear into that person. The psychology of it all, of what does this human fear versus what that human fears. And again, too, if we're going into, let's just say, something evil of UFO abduction, well, these creatures, they're not stupid. They're going to try to do the job as best as they can and make it as easy as they can. So they'll try to use, like any type of human being or good military officer would do, is to use psychology to get the job done as quickly and as easily as possible.
If you just talked about the using different fears, honestly, if I saw a giant lizard-looking being, or even if it was a Sasquatch, or even if it was a large praying mantis, either I would take off running, assuming I'd have the power to do so. You mentioned skinwalker. Is that another term for shapeshifter?
Yes, okay. Skinwalkers. And we'll go into that, into portals, and maybe go back to the UFO wave on this here. Yeah, a skinwalker is going to be a shapeshifter. Going to be able to be, in human form, 2 feet, or it can morph into something on else. For example, the Navajo. This is going to be in the northwest corner of New Mexico. They're always talking about these evil beings, the skinwalkers. And one of the things that it ties into history is that when the Navajos were defeated by the U.S. Cav, they ended up being put on basically a POW compound out on Fort Sumner in the 1860s. But before they were marched off on the Trail of Tears, the medicine men told the people in charge, the generals, the officers of rank, let our medicine men stay behind, because in this area there are these stargates, portaleses, doorways where these skinwalkers come through, and we are keeping them at bay. And no, you cannot do that, said the military. That's a bunch of gobbledygook. And they were all marched off to Fort Sumner. So after X amount of years, they were let to go back to their old stomping grounds, their homeland up in the northwest corner of New Mexico. And they said, well, now, the barn door's been open and all the horses have been let go. And now they've been trying since the 1800s to try to get a handle on what has been let go and what has passed through this area into the world of these terrible beings. And there's different stories about these skinwalkers, what they want. Is it the power of the human body, of the human energy to tap into, to corrupt a soul, to cannibalize a person? And interestingly enough, there used to be a highway that used to run through that area up to, gosh, I'm going to say into Monticello, Utah, before it ended, and that was the infamous Highway 666. And only in the mid-1990s did the highway department finally change the number of that. But on that highway, there was just some horrific, terrible accidents on that asphalt. And of course, people would say, we saw something there that did not make sense, a skinwalker. And it's kind of like, that old Twilight Zone Rod Serling story of, with the character's name, Nan Adams, as she's going from Philadelphia to Los Angeles, and she keeps on seeing that hitchhiker going my way.
Yes.
Don't pick him on up.
Yes. Now, you mentioned the Navajo beings, or the Navajos considered the skinwalkers evil beings, and you mentioned some of the things that they did to people, like cannibalized people, or what else? What other things or experiments or anything else did they use humans for? I mean, if they could be anything they want, what would they essentially need us for? Is my question.
Well, no, that's just one. Concept of that's okay. What the Navajos say about the skinwalkers and about they're very evil and watch on out. Wizards. There's when you get into Spanish, witchcraft, brujeria. And they're going to talk about other types of skinwalkers. Well, or shapeshifters. Let's go into something on over here. Even with we don't really have too much time to go into this, but I'll try to make it as brief as possible. But if you go into like what the Mohammedans believe in, and about the jinn, and what's a jinn? A cleaned up version of a jinn is going to be Barbara Eden's 1960s sitcom I Dream of Jeannie, and there's going to be 5 or 6 tribes of these jinn, and their king is Iblis, and they're shapeshifters, and they come into this world, and what their goal is either to have humanity completely destroyed before this world is gone or time ends, or have humanity be in great strife, be it, Sodom and Gomorrah to the 10th power of all kinds of terrible things happening to us, the times of trouble, and they get the power of this. Because if you go into like the Quran and other type of Mohammedan literature, they're talking about that when God, or as we call him Allah, made this reality, I do this on my tours, I explain this, but he made the archangels and the angels, and then he made the jinn, and their king is Iblis, and then he made the humans. And he said, you watch over my most prized possession, the humans. The archangels, the angels said yes, and the 5 or 6 tribes, depending on the translation. And King Iblis said, no, these are faulty beings. And there was a war, and these beings were cast on out. Now, it's not going to say dimension, but it dances around that in all the literature on out there. And they have these doorways or portals or stargates, whatever you want to call them, that come through into this world. And these jinn are shapeshifters. And gosh, these doorways aren't going to be, at point W. They move around, they open, they close. Sometimes, they're dormant, etc. And I say that there is some type of doorway, passageway that moves around, and that is out there east of Santa Fe in the Pecos area. And that's how come we have this UFO activity. We have the ghostly phenomena. And this is where we do have a number of mysterious sightings and vanishings. And one of the things about this is that even the Pecos Indians, Pueblo Indians, and they no longer exist. They ended up joining on up with what Manzano, Pueblo back in the 1880s, 1890s, etc. They'd been decimated by the Apache and then by smallpox. But he had warned the Spaniards, 1530s, and then later on the Americans coming down the Santa Fe Trail, watch on out. There's something very dangerous on up past Pecos, in the area where these people nowadays go missing. So again, too, this doorway moves around, and again, if you go onto the internet, there's something similar that happened in Bennington, Vermont, in the 1940s into the mid-1950s, of all these people going missing, or them being found later on in an area that, or the body being found in an area that had already been thoroughly searched. So yeah, that's there's different things on out there that can use these doorways. In other words, it's going to be kind of like the old 1966 Star Trek with Kirk and Spock and the gang, where they're using these warp holes to go from A to B, and these doorways on up there or around the world, physical UFO craft can use them, dimensional beings can use them, and that's the superhighway that stops here in planet Earth.
I'm going to switch back to ghosts, considering we're talking about, first of all, dimensions. And let me point this out, and I would think you would agree. If you agree with what Bob Lazar said when he worked at Area 51's S4, which S4 is technically different, he said that if you have the ability to create a gravitational wave, then therefore you are, by definition, time travel. You can, create a wormhole, an Einstein-Rosen bridge, which essentially is a doorway to another dimension. So my question to you is, do you think that these dimensions are set in one place? Or, like, for instance, you talked about bodies ending up or disappearing in one area and then dropping off in a whole other area. So is point A always in one place, but point B is able to be moved, or is it kind of wherever it's set?
Well, I think that, point A can move a great deal, and then maybe eventually it's going to become point B because it's moved so far. But there were some areas in this world where point A stayed point A for the longest time, be it the Pyramid of Khufu or Cheops outside of Cairo for the longest time, or Stonehenge. And one of the interesting things about this, and what Bob Lazar says is about gravity wave, there are these ley lines, in other words, like Tesla type of energy. Most of the time they're dormant, sometimes they come to life. Sometimes there's other areas where you say, wow, I'm really getting all kinds of activity here. And on these lines, a lot of times, this is where you're going to find these activity, and we have these mysteries or close to it, where people have disappeared, where people have seen UFOs, or you've got, again, too, it's like, for example, some places, like some neighborhoods, you're going to have a tremendous amount of murders, divorces, suicides, etc., and it's going to be like, how do you say, a small little doorway that's going to be opening on up every now and then from this negative area. And then you have other areas where, you have UFO activity, where things, you got the big question mark. What did I just see on up there? How could this happen? And then, of course, you got other areas that the government and the mainstream media is going to give you, false data. It's going to give you, like old Sherlock Holmes, the red herring, or an Alfred Hitchcock film or story. No, that's just misdirection, so that you're going to spend your time investigating point X, why everything's happening at point M. I get into a lot of trouble about this one here, Dr. J, but it's about Dulce. And I'm going to say that the vast majority of what these talk about Dulce, New Mexico, that is sleight of hand. That's misinformation. They want you to concentrate on that area and spend X amount of money, time, trying to figure something on out there, when that's not where the happening is at.
That's a good question. I'm glad you brought up Dulce because I've never been to New Mexico. And for those of people out there who have, please forgive me for not knowing the full geography of New Mexico. How far is Santa Fe from Dulce?
I'm going to say roughly it's to the north, about 120 mile or so to the north.
Close enough. A little, maybe under a 2-hour drive max, I would think, right?
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
So a lot of people,
less. Yeah. Go ahead.
A lot of people talk about, like you mentioned, this underground base where it's, I believe, 6 or 7 levels, and the bottom 2 levels are occupied solely by extraterrestrials, and then the third level from the bottom has extraterrestrials and humans, and then the rest is humans. Do you think that base is not in Dulce, but somewhere else in New Mexico, or doesn't exist at all?
Bingo. I think that there is numerous bases in this world, but the one that does not exist at Dulce, as far as some of these people that have talked about Dulce, they're poor people. They're out of their mind. Others perhaps did see something at a different place, and because of how they've had their mind warped, be it by black ops or who knows what, that they have, they'll say, "Oh, it's got to be there at Dulce. That's what it was." No, it's not. Now, Dulce, it's on the Jicarilla. Well, there's a large Indian reservation there, Jicarilla Apache, and there's a place called Archuleta, Mesa, and they got some towers on up there. And how this came to being, and I, again too, I may be repeating myself because I've done this on lectures, but for example, the American government or the Pentagon, they're always trying to, and they do a very, very good job of this, of tricking the mainstream media. The mainstream media is not that smart to begin with, but for example, like with World War II, we're letting the Wehrmacht in on that we're going to invade the Pas-de-Calais. We're going to hit the Pas-de-Calais. No, that's all sleight of hand. We invade Normandy. Same thing with Desert Storm. We're going to storm the shores north of Kuwait, and we're going to engage the Iraqis there on their version of the Maginot Line. No. What we end up doing is swinging left with our armored column and going across the desert in a flanking movement. But that's what the Pentagon, the honchos do, is they're going to put something on out there, people are going to concentrate on it, and then they do something completely different. And that's what happens with what happened at Dulce. There's this that happened at Dulce, that there's UFO activity, that it's got to be this, it's got to be that, or it's got to be the government that's doing that. Sure, Dr. J, there has been some UFO activity over Dulce, but it's not what is let on. And for example, one of the guys and he's passed on, his name was Gabe Valdez, and his son wrote a book on him, Dulce Base. Gabe was a state police officer that worked the Dulce area. Now, me and Gabe, and I always preface this because I'm going to say some negative things about his conclusions. Now, me and Gabe did not agree on almost anything, from personality-wise to the conclusions about Dulce and what's going on up there. But as a man, Gabe Valdez was one of the finest human beings that ever was. And going on out into the wilds, I had no fear. I knew that no matter what happened, if we ran into a bear, a rabid mountain lion, a group of cannibalistic freaks, or UFO creatures with ray guns, whatever it was, that guy's going to stay with me, and he's going to get me on out of there, or he's going to die trying. And I say this man, even though we didn't agree at all on anything, if he had been back in World War II, he would have won the Medal of Honor posthumously at Okinawa or Tarawa. Fine human being. Well, anyway, his bent on this, and a lot of other people go with this, is that what's going on up there at Dulce is has to do with some type of government activity on up there. Well, what the government's doing is, again, too, it's from A to B type of stuff. Like if you'll find a mutilated cow, and there'll be some mutilated cows on up there, and then real close to it, within maybe 10 to 20 yards, you're going to find a NATO, this is an example, a NATO gas mask, an American gas mask. In other words, for somebody to find it, a reporter says, hey, this has got to be what the government's doing with they're mutilating the cows, or then they're going to find some pieces of aluminum or aluminium, tiny little pieces of strip that you let go in midair so that you can blind a radar dish. In other words, that's what they're trying to do, is saying all of this with the cattle mutilation has to do with the government, and the government has something going on over here with alien, etc., here in the Dulce area. That's sleight of hand. In other words, we want you to find that. In other words, some of the cows that have been mutilated on up there, yeah, they've been dropped by a Huey or a Black Hawk in the helicopter, and they land on a fence. Crunch goes the fence, or breaks timbers, and that's what they want you to find. Now, as far as UFO waves go, when we do have these UFO waves, it's usually right around there's numerous cows that are found mutilated. And for those in the audience who don't know what that means, that's ranchers are finding cows in their pasture with at least 90% of their blood taken on out. Their sexual organs have been removed, and it's not with a butcher knife. It's like cauterized, like laser-like surgery. Their udders have been removed through the chest. Sometimes their heart has been removed through a very small little incision there. Sometimes part of their tongue, all their tongue or their eyes have been taken. And there's no human footprints around these cattle. There's no predators that have killed these cows. Whatever kills these cows kills them. The cows don't have time to struggle. And so that's, well, you better reel me back in there, Dr. J. Where are we going with this?
No, we were talking about Dulce. We actually have a couple minutes left. I'm glad you brought up cattle mutilations, because there has to be, a lot of them are explained. There was a period of time that this company was trying to, since the blood of cows essentially is very close to humans, they were doing some sort of experiments. That was one explanation. So I would think it'd be very probable, instead of going to raise your own cows or buy them, just go steal a few and then blame it on the aliens. That's another way of using misdirections. And then conversely, on the other hand, like Linda Moulton Howe's done a lot of research on actual cattle that seem to have no evidence of being tampered with by other humans. Again, that's for debate. But since we are almost out of time, I'm going to give you a chance to give a final statement on what you think about cattle mutilations, because I also want you to plug in your website and what you do for people.
Okay, quickly. So Dulce, a lot of the cattle mutilations over there is done by black ops, for lack of a better word, to throw people off the track. But cattle mutilation is a fact. It's not being done. The majority of it is not being done by government. It's being done by alien. We cannot slaughter a beef like the way that we're finding them on out there. On another show, I can tell you about investigations of these cows. So yes, it is from something parts unknown, not humans, that are killing these other cows. And you're right about bovine being close to human blood, and maybe has something to do with doing some type of hybrid that they are trying to construct for this world. And Linda Moulton Howe, she's correct on a number of subjects. As far as Dulce, I do not think that there's very little, with UFO activity on up there. There's some, but the vast majority of it is sleight of hand done to bring the media into a different direction. Now, as far as what I do ghost tours, history tours here in Santa Fe. I'm a keynote speaker for groups, for example, business groups that want to know about the paranormal. If they're having a seminar here in Santa Fe, I do that, or I take them on tours. I also write books on the paranormal and conspiracy. What else do I do? I'm a SAG-AFTRA actor. I guess I do a lot of things. So if anybody wants to, do a tour with me when they come to Santa Fe, go to my website, SantaFeGhostAndHistoryTours.com. You're going to see a lot of information concerning ghost investigations, pictures of shades that have been done through the decades, UFO information, also pictures of people that are, having a good time on my tours or investigations. And gosh, help me out there, Dr. Jake. What else should I plug? All the telephone numbers are on the website. And if you can't remember Santa Fe Ghost and HistoryTours.com, just go Alan Pacheco or Al Pacheco, Pacheco, Ghost Tours or Ghosts, and you'll get to my website. And it's like 180 pages of good times and data, and you'll find all kinds of interesting tidbits there. It's like Alice through the Looking Glass, running through the Rose Garden, all the different roads you can go, pathways you can go on that website.
And you absolutely plugged it in. I would normally plug people's thank yous in. I guess I could have a few times for a few people here. I want to definitely thank the station managers of Late Night in the Midlands, who are also the audio engineers for this show, Katie and Daryl Neely, as well as Michael Vara, the owner. And in the UK, we also have JC. Also from Black Swamp Digital Radio, we have Wise Frog. I also want to thank my editor, Adam Keene, and also Pam Vrettenberg, my social media manager, UnitedTruthSeekers.com. Folks, everything about the show is the name of it, Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live. With that being said, I have to say good night, and I will see you all Monday morning with a live new show.